I rented a small guest house on the edge of a large property just outside the city. It looked quiet and private, exactly what I wanted for a short break. The listing showed a separate entrance, its own little yard, and a private parking spot. The only thing that stood out was a line that said shared driveway, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it just meant I'd be passing through the main gate they used. It didn't seem like a big deal. The reviews were mostly positive, the pictures looked clean and updated, and the price was decent. I booked it for 3 nights. When I got there, it was early evening. The sun was starting to go down, and the place looked almost too quiet. The main house sat up a slight hill at the back of the property, a 2-story white structure with shutters and a big wraparound porch. The guest house was about 30 feet away from it, down the slope a little, and had its own path leading from the driveway. There were no signs, no greeting, just a keypad on the door which I used to get in. Everything was just as described, clean, cozy, nothing fancy, but well maintained. There was a small kitchenette, a little couch, a queen-sized bed, and a bathroom. It smelled a bit like lemon cleaner and air freshener, but it was neat and didn't look like it had been lived in for a while. I unpacked, heated up something I grabbed on the way, and spent the rest of the night watching TV and scrolling through my phone. No issues. The next day was uneventful. I left early in the morning to meet a friend in the city. Drove through the narrow driveway again, passed by the main house. No one outside, no lights on that I could see. When I got back that night, it was almost 10. The driveway was empty. My car was the only one. I parked, went back into the guest house, showered, and went to sleep. Totally normal. But things changed on the second night. I had left around noon that day to explore a few places on my own. I visited a couple of shops, ate lunch downtown, then just wandered around. I came back around 9 p.m., and as I turned off the road and into the shared driveway, I noticed something immediately off. There was a big, dark green pickup truck parked across the back of the driveway, right behind my car. It hadn't been there when I left earlier. The truck wasn't parked in a spot, it was just sitting there diagonally, blocking me in completely. My car was boxed in against the wooden fence, and this truck was right behind it. It looked intentional. At first, I figured maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe a contractor or someone forgot to move it. I walked up to the main house. It was completely dark. No porch light, no inside lights visible through the windows. I knocked on the front door, light at first, then louder. Nothing. I waited a bit, walked around to see if there was another entrance or maybe someone outside. The property was still. No cars on the road behind the fence, no dogs barking, no movement. I knocked again. Nothing. I went back to the guest house and waited. I figured maybe they'd come out soon. 30 minutes passed. Still no lights in the house, no sound, no movement. I started to get frustrated. Then, while pacing in the driveway, I happened to glance up. One of the upstairs windows of the main house was open. Behind the curtain, I saw someone standing there. Person, clearly, just standing still looking down at me. I couldn't make out their face, but they weren't trying to hide. It felt like they wanted me to know they were watching. I stood there for a few seconds, a little stunned. Then I raised my hand and waved, just kind of awkwardly. The figure didn't move, didn't wave back, just stood there, unmoving like a mannequin. The curtain shifted a little in the breeze, but the person stayed still. It started to feel less like someone had accidentally blocked me in, and more like it was done on purpose. I went back and knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. I sent the host a message through the Airbnb app. Nothing. No reply, no indication they'd even seen it. I double-checked the listing. It was definitely the right property, definitely listed under one name, not a company. The host's name was generic, no photo on the profile, and the response time said, within a few hours. It had now been over an hour since I messaged. Eventually, I started looking up local tow companies. I explained the situation to one of them over the phone, but they said I'd need the police involved first, since it was private property. They couldn't just come and remove a vehicle without permission. I thanked them and hung up. Just as I was about to call the non-emergency police number, I heard the sound of a door opening behind me. I turned around, and the front door of the main house was ajar. A man stepped out. He was maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing a white undershirt and jeans. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge me, just walked past me, slowly, like I wasn't even there. He headed straight to the truck, climbed in, and backed it up a few feet so I could squeeze my car out. Then he got out, shut the door, and walked right back inside. No words, no eye contact. He didn't even glance at me. It was one of the most unsettling moments I've ever experienced. It wasn't that he was rude, it was that he acted like I didn't exist, like I was part of some game and he was following a script. There was no apology, no explanation, just total silence. As soon as the truck was moved, the house lights flicked off again. I stood there for a minute, debating whether I was overreacting. But something about the way he moved, the way that person stared from the window earlier, it didn't feel random. It felt planned, or at least rehearsed, like they'd done this before. I went back into the guest house, packed my things as quickly as I could, and threw them into the trunk. I didn't bother locking up. I just drove out of the driveway, checking my rearview mirror the entire time. I didn't stop driving until I was 30 minutes away and sitting in a gas station parking lot. I booked a last-minute hotel and stayed there for the rest of the trip. Airbnb eventually responded to my complaint, but they only gave me a partial refund. Said because I left voluntarily, they couldn't issue a full one. I didn't bother arguing. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. But a few weeks later, I randomly came across a Reddit thread about strange Airbnb experiences. I scrolled through it out of curiosity, then froze when I saw a comment about the same guest house. Someone had posted, "Great place, but the family upstairs plays mind games with the guests. Felt like they enjoyed making you feel stuck." Another user replied saying something similar happened to them. Being blocked in, no one answering the door, strange looks from the upstairs windows. It wasn't just me. That's what stuck with me the most. Whoever lives in that house knows exactly what they're doing. I booked a high-rise Airbnb in the city for a quick 3-day work trip. It was in a nice building, one of those newer glass towers that looks sleek on the outside and smells like fresh paint in the halls. I picked it because it was close to the conference center, and the pictures made it look clean and modern. When I arrived, everything seemed fine. The check-in was smooth, the key was in a lockbox, the lobby was quiet, and the elevator was fast. The apartment itself was small but tidy. White walls, pale wood floors, big windows with blackout curtains, a compact kitchen. It had a minimalist kind of vibe. There was a little desk near the window, a small sofa, and a mounted TV. I wasn't planning on spending much time inside anyway, just sleeping and maybe checking a few emails before heading out to meetings. But there was one thing that stood out immediately: a huge mirror on the bedroom wall right across from the bed. It stretched almost floor to ceiling and spanned the width of the wall. It wasn't a fancy frame or anything, just a basic rectangular slab. But it looked odd. I couldn't explain it right away, but something about it felt wrong. The light hit it in a strange way, and the reflection seemed ever so slightly distorted. Not like a funhouse mirror, but just enough that it felt off. At first, I chalked it up to travel fatigue. I'd been up since 5 a.m., flying, sitting in a cab, checking emails on the ride. I unpacked quickly, set up my laptop on the desk, and took a shower. I ordered some takeout, ate in front of my laptop, and then got into bed early. But even lying there, I couldn't stop glancing at the mirror. I wasn't paranoid usually. I'd stayed in dozens of AIRBNBs before, even weirder ones. Cabins, shared houses, one time even a converted garage. But this was the first time something truly unsettled me. It was the way the edges of the mirror didn't quite touch the wall. There was maybe a 1/4-inch gap running around the entire border, just enough to see a shadowy line between the mirror and the drywall. And when I looked closely, the surface didn't reflect like proper glass. It had a dullness to it. I leaned over and tapped on it lightly with my knuckle. It didn't sound like glass. Glass has that crisp, high-pitched sound when you tap it. This was dull, almost like plastic. The kind of sound you'd hear tapping on a plexiglass divider or an old picture frame with a plastic front. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself it was probably a cheap mirror from a hardware store. Maybe the owner didn't install it properly. Maybe the wall was just uneven. Still, I didn't like it. I tried to ignore it and sleep, but my eyes kept flicking toward the reflection. Even with the lights off, the street lights through the curtains lit the room just enough to keep the mirror visible. And it felt like it was watching me more than reflecting me. I ended up tossing a bath towel over part of it and finally managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I got dressed, grabbed a coffee downstairs, and went to my meetings. I didn't think about the mirror for most of the day. I was busy, distracted, talking to people. But that night, when I got back to the apartment, the feeling returned as soon as I stepped into the bedroom. I stared at that mirror for a long time. The room was silent, and all I could hear was the distant hum of traffic below and the occasional creak of the building settling. Couldn't shake it. Something was wrong. I stood in front of the mirror and ran my fingers around the edge. The border was loose, not fully flush with the wall. I pulled just a little bit, not enough to break anything, but enough to test it. And it shifted. Not by much, but it moved like it was attached with magnets or weak adhesive. My chest tightened. I hesitated. Then I got my phone, turned on the flashlight, and carefully pulled one edge of the mirror away from the wall. It made a slight cracking sound, like glue peeling off paint. I angled my light behind it and froze. There was a hole, a rectangular cutout in the drywall, maybe 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. Inside, nestled on a small wooden shelf screwed into the studs, was a camera, a GoPro, positioned to face directly into the bedroom, angled perfectly toward the bed. It wasn't on. At least I didn't see a light, but it was mounted and aimed, like it was ready to record. Wires trailed down behind the shelf into the darkness of the wall, but I couldn't see where they went. I backed away immediately. My heart was racing, not like from fear of a ghost or something irrational. This was real, physical. Someone had placed a camera behind a fake mirror, pointing at the bed I had just slept in. I took photos of everything, the hole, the camera, the mirror, the wires. I even took a short video, narrating the time and date as I showed the camera through the gap. My hands were shaking. I left the apartment that minute. I didn't pack. I grabbed my wallet, phone, and laptop and went straight to the lobby. I sat in one of the chairs near the entrance and pulled up the Airbnb app. I reported the listing immediately and uploaded the photos. I also called their support line and explained everything in detail. To their credit, they took it seriously. Within 30 minutes, someone from their trust and safety team called me back and said they were relocating me to a hotel nearby and would launch an investigation. I went to the hotel, still unsettled. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of a clean, generic hotel room, and I couldn't stop thinking about that hole in the wall, that camera, that mirror. How many people had stayed in that room and never noticed? How many had been recorded without knowing? I didn't sleep much. The next day, I checked out of the hotel and flew back home. Work was done, but the whole experience stuck in my head. I followed up with Airbnb a few times, and 2 weeks later they finally sent me an update. According to them, the camera didn't contain a memory card. It wasn't actively recording, and the property owner claimed it belonged to a previous tenant and had supposedly been forgotten inside the wall during renovations. They said the unit had changed hands a few times over the years. Airbnb said they couldn't prove intent, but they still removed the listing out of an abundance of caution. It didn't make me feel any better. The idea that someone had drilled a hole in the wall and mounted a camera pointed at the bed didn't seem like an accident. Whether or not it had been used recently, someone had put it there on purpose. Maybe they had removed the card before I arrived. Maybe the camera was Wi-Fi enabled and sent footage somewhere else. I'll never know. Since then, I've changed. I still travel. I still use AIRBNB sometimes, but I check everything now. Every mirror, every vent, every smoke detector. I tap on the walls. I look for tiny lights, holes, anything unusual. I don't care if I look paranoid. I'd rather look paranoid than be watched in my sleep. And I'll never forget that feeling, the cold, steady stare of my own reflection in a mirror that was never really a mirror at all. I rented a small loft-style Airbnb while I was in town to visit a few galleries that had picked up some of my photography work. I shoot mostly black and white street photography, and this was the first time I'd had more than one gallery show my stuff at once. I felt proud but also exhausted, so I booked a place that seemed quiet and unique, somewhere I could edit in peace, maybe even unwind with a few new shots around the city. The Airbnb was on the top floor of an old brick building, tucked into a quieter street that still buzzed a little at night. The listing had said artistic loft with vintage charm, and it was exactly that. Tall windows with sheer curtains, worn hardwood floors, and mismatched antique furniture. A clawfoot tub in the bathroom, a velvet armchair in the corner. The whole space felt a little dusty, like it had stories of its own. But I liked that. Felt like it had character. There was a large wooden desk near the far wall beneath a window, a heavy thing with little drawers and brass handles. On top of it sat a big sketch pad, closed, along with a small glass jar filled with pencils. I figured the owner might be an artist or leave it there for guests to doodle. It didn't feel weird, at least not then. I carried my bags up the stairs, set my gear on the table, and walked through the space slowly. The bed was tucked into a sleeping nook, kind of a half wall that separated it from the rest of the loft, but not fully closed off. From the desk, you could see right into the bed area. That stuck with me later. The first day passed without anything strange. I went to a gallery opening, had a quick drink with some friends, then came back and edited photos until midnight. I fell asleep fast. The second day was the same, busy, routine, comfortable. It wasn't until the third day that I noticed the sketch pad again. I was drinking coffee at the desk that morning, scrolling through a batch of test prints I'd brought, when I absently reached over and flipped open the pad. I wasn't even thinking about it. It was just there, and I was a little bored. The first few pages were nothing. Loose figure drawings, a couple still life sketches of fruit or furniture, and what looked like warm-up doodles. But as I turned to the next page, my eyes caught on something that made me freeze. There was a detailed pencil sketch of a person in bed. Not just any bed, it was the same one I was sleeping in. The same blanket, same pillows. And the angle was unmistakable. It was drawn from where the desk sat, the exact view someone would have if they were sitting here watching. The person in the bed had their back turned, hair messy, one arm out from under the covers. It looked like me. I stared at the drawing for a long time. I told myself it could just be a coincidence. Maybe the host liked to draw this room. Maybe it was a self-portrait from years ago. But I turned the page again. Another drawing. This time, it showed someone brushing their teeth in front of the bathroom mirror. The layout was accurate. The sketch had little details. My black t-shirt hanging off the towel hook, a phone charger plugged into the wall behind me. I checked the date written in the corner. It was 3 days ago. My stomach started to tighten. I flipped through the pad faster now. One after another, sketches of me doing everyday things inside this loft. Sitting at the desk, eating a sandwich, lying on the bed with my laptop. All from angles inside the room. Always from somewhere else in the space. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone stayed here before who looked like me. Maybe these were made months ago and just happened to match what I was doing. But the timestamps on some of the drawings, written lightly in the corner in pencil, matched the exact dates I had been there. I started taking pictures of each sketch with my phone, one by one, flipping through them with growing dread. My hands were shaking a little. Some of the drawings showed me from such intimate angles, moments I hadn't even remembered doing. One sketch showed me yawning and stretching, eyes still squinting with sleep. Another had me curled up in bed, one leg out of the blanket, exactly like I had been that first night. I looked around the loft slowly. Something shifted in me. My neck started to itch. I suddenly hated the openness of the place, the way the bed wasn't fully closed off. How easy it would be to watch someone from behind the desk, or even from one of the shadowed corners near the ceiling beams. There was no TV in the unit, no obvious electronics besides the small Bluetooth speaker on the shelf. I scanned the room for anything that looked out of place, vents, wall hangings, picture frames. I even checked behind the mirror in the bathroom, but I didn't find anything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I had been watched since the moment I arrived. I packed my stuff immediately. I threw my clothes into my duffel bag, grabbed my camera, laptop, all my chargers. I didn't bother folding anything. I just needed to leave. The street was still quiet when I walked out. I remember the sound of my bag wheels bouncing on the old sidewalk, how loud it felt in the morning stillness. I got into my car and just sat there for a few minutes, heart still racing. Before I pulled away, I sent a message to Airbnb through the app and uploaded the photos I had taken of the sketchpad. I didn't say much, just that I found disturbing drawings that suggested someone had been watching me and that I no longer felt safe in the unit. A few hours later, I got a call from their customer service. They refunded me in full and said they were looking into the matter and had put a temporary hold on the listing. The host replied to my message, too. He said he'd been inspired by guests over the years and that the drawings were his way of capturing the spirit of the place. He claimed it was a long-time habit, not meant to make anyone uncomfortable. But that didn't explain how the sketches were so recent, or how they matched everything I'd done in that loft down to the smallest details. It didn't explain the perspective of the drawings, always from somewhere else in the room, always as if someone had been sitting there, silently watching me. I didn't respond to him. I didn't want anything more to do with it. I haven't stayed in an Airbnb since. Hotels might be more expensive, but at least I know who has access to my room. And I never flip open strange notebooks anymore, not even out of habit. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures. A single-story wood-paneled structure tucked into a pocket of trees, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. The listing promised total privacy, no neighbors, no interruptions. That's what I was after. A few days alone to work on my manuscript, without traffic noise or people knocking or deliveries or anything else to pull me away from it. The drive up was peaceful. No streetlights once I turned off the highway, just gravel roads and forest. I kept checking my GPS to make sure I was still on the right track. Eventually, the trees parted, and the cabin came into view. It looked clean and well-kept. There was a small deck out front with 2 chairs and a table. The key was in a lockbox, just like the host had said. Inside, everything was simple but nice. Open floor plan, kitchen and living area together, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. It smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet, maybe a candle. I unpacked a few things and made myself coffee. There was no TV, just a Bluetooth speaker, a bookshelf with some older paperbacks, and a wood-burning stove in the corner. I turned off my phone and put it in a drawer. That first afternoon, I settled in. Started outlining a chapter I'd been struggling with for weeks. The silence helped me focus. There was no hum of appliances, no traffic outside, just birds and the wind in the trees. Around sunset, I took a short walk on the narrow dirt path that led deeper into the woods behind the cabin. The trees thickened quickly, and after a few minutes, I turned back. I wanted to get inside before it got too dark. Back at the cabin, I heated up some soup and read for a while. I didn't notice the door until the next morning. It was set into the foundation around the back of the cabin. I saw it when I went outside to drink my coffee and walk around the property. The cabin was built on a slight slope, so the rear wall was higher off the ground than the front. Tucked beneath it, almost hidden behind some overgrown shrubs, was a heavy-looking metal door with a handle and a padlock. It wasn't mentioned in the listing. I crouched down to get a better look. The concrete around the door looked older, a little cracked, but the lock was shiny and clean. No rust. It looked brand new. I tried the handle. Locked tight. I went back inside and sent the host a message. I kept it short. Hey, I noticed a locked basement door around back. Just curious if that's used or occupied. He responded about an hour later. Said, no, just storage down there. Locked up. Nothing to worry about. Sounded fine. I let it go. That night, I stayed up late writing. The quiet helped. I was finally getting words down without forcing them. Around 11:30, I made tea and sat by the window to relax before going to bed. I heard something, a creak. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal stepping on the deck. I turned off the lights and looked outside. The trees were still, and the deck was empty. Then I heard it again. Not above, below, creaking floorboards but muffled. From underneath. I turned and stared at the wooden floor beneath my feet. I stood still and listened. There it was again, slow, heavy footsteps. Not constant, just a few steps, then silence. Then a few more. The kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to be heard. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood in the middle of the room and waited. Eventually the sounds stopped. I told myself it must have been something shifting in the basement. Maybe the house settling. I tried to sleep, but every time the floor creaked or the wind pushed against the window, I felt that tightness in my chest come back. The next morning, I went outside. I walked straight to the basement door. It was still locked, but I noticed something different. The padlock, it wasn't the same one I'd seen the day before. The other one was new and shiny. This one was different. Still new, but a different color. And the brand was different. I knew because I'd looked at the old one pretty closely when I first found the door. This wasn't the same. That didn't sit right with me. I hadn't heard anyone drive up.
No vehicles.
No footsteps outside. But someone had been there. Someone had changed the lock. I packed my things quickly. I didn't stop to eat or shower. I tossed everything into my duffel and left a short note on the kitchen counter telling the host I was checking out early. I drove back to the highway without looking back. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out from behind the trees. Nothing. When I got home, I called Airbnb. I told them what happened. I tried to keep my voice calm and just explain what I saw, what I heard. They took it seriously. A few days later, I got a message from someone in their trust and safety department. They said the host had previously rented out the basement space without disclosing it in the listing. Off-platform, they called it, meaning he'd let people stay down there without going through Airbnb's system. No verification, no background checks, just cash deals probably. They wouldn't tell me who had been staying down there, or if someone had been there the same time I was. But they said the listing had been removed, and the host was being investigated. I still think about the footsteps, the way they moved, slow, careful, like the person knew someone was upstairs, like they were waiting for something. I'm not sure I'll ever rent a standalone place again. Not without checking every inch of it first. Not unless I can see every room, every door. Because if someone was down there, someone the host didn't tell me about, I don't know what they wanted, but I know what it felt like. Felt like they were listening, watching, waiting for the right moment. And if I hadn't heard those steps when I did, I try not to finish that thought. I booked the Airbnb for a long weekend, Friday to Monday. It was a 2-story house tucked into a quiet suburb with a clean driveway, trimmed hedges, and a little front porch with 2 white chairs. It wasn't far from the city, but it felt peaceful. The inside was cozy, just like the photos, light gray walls, hardwood floors, and simple modern furniture. It had 2 bedrooms upstairs and an open living room downstairs that led into a small kitchen and dining area. I got there late Friday afternoon. The host had sent me the code for the lockbox, and everything went smoothly. Inside, the house smelled like vanilla-scented air freshener. There were fresh towels on the bed, a welcome note on the counter, and even a little bag of snacks by the coffee machine. Felt normal, welcoming, even. I unpacked, made myself a quick sandwich, and lounged on the couch watching Netflix for a while. It had been a long week at work, and I was looking forward to doing absolutely nothing for 3 days. That night, after showering and brushing my teeth, I went upstairs to the guest room, the one with the softer mattress, and crawled under the covers. As I turned off the light, I noticed something above the hallway between the 2 bedrooms. It was an attic access panel, a small rectangular door in the ceiling. That wasn't strange. Lots of houses had them, but something about this one made me look twice. It wasn't flush with the ceiling. One corner sagged slightly, just enough to cast a shadow. And around the edges of the frame, there were dark smudges, like fingerprints or dirty streaks. I figured maybe a repair guy had been up there recently, maybe checking insulation or wiring. Still, I remember pausing for a moment, staring at it longer than I needed to, before shrugging it off and going to bed. The first night passed quietly. I didn't hear anything strange. But on Saturday morning, when I was brushing my teeth, I glanced up at the attic panel again. It still looked off-center. I stood under it for a second, craning my neck, but I wasn't tall enough to see much. I thought about pulling over a chair and checking it out, but I decided it wasn't my business. It wasn't my house. The day went by uneventfully. I drove out to get lunch, walked around a local park, and stopped at a small bookstore. I got back to the house around 6 p.m. and spent the evening on the couch watching a movie and scrolling through my phone. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and went upstairs. That night, I fell asleep quickly but woke up at some point to a noise. I wasn't sure what time it was. Everything was dark, and I hadn't looked at my phone yet. I lay still for a second, listening. I thought I heard something above me, a soft creak. Then another one, slower, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. It was quiet, barely there, but it didn't sound like the house settling. It sounded more deliberate, like movement. I tried to convince myself it was just the wood expanding or cooling off, but something about it made my skin crawl. Eventually, I dozed off again. But when I got up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m., I walked out into the hallway and immediately stopped. The attic panel, the same one that had looked a little off before, was now open. Just a few inches, enough that I could see darkness inside. The gap was thin, but it hadn't been there earlier. I froze. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, staring up at it. My first thought was, maybe it slipped open on its own. But it hadn't been loose before. It had stayed in place since I arrived. And now it was hanging open like someone had pushed it from the inside. My second thought was, there's someone up there. I backed slowly into the bedroom, shut the door without making a sound, and locked it. My hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening. I couldn't hear anything now. No footsteps, no movement. But I couldn't stop staring at the door, wondering if I should call the police. I kept trying to think logically, trying to come up with a reason why the panel would be open. But I kept going back to the same thought. I didn't open it. After maybe 20 minutes, I went back out into the hallway, more cautious this time. I didn't want to get close to the panel, but I didn't want to leave it like that either. I walked downstairs and found a broom in the kitchen closet. Then I brought a chair from the dining room and stood on it carefully, broom in hand, trying not to make noise. I poked at the panel, slowly lifting it back into place until it was flat against the ceiling. I held it there for a second, gently tapped the corners, then stepped down. There was no latch, nothing to lock it. I didn't go back to the bedroom. I stayed downstairs on the couch for the rest of the night, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ceiling. Every little creak made my chest tighten. I kept glancing at the staircase, half expecting someone to come down. But nothing happened. Morning came slowly, and when the light started coming in through the windows, I felt a small bit of relief. I waited until a reasonable hour, around 9 a.m., and messaged the host. I kept it calm, just said I noticed the attic panel open during the night and asked if there was any chance someone else had access to the house. She responded an hour later. Her reply was short and weirdly casual. She said she was so sorry about that, and then admitted her ex-boyfriend used to help with repairs and technically still had a copy of the key. She claimed he didn't come by anymore and that she had told him not to, but she didn't seem surprised by my message at all. She just said she'd look into it and understood if I wanted to check out early. That was it. No apology, no offer of a refund, no explanation for the open attic panel. I didn't respond. I packed everything in under 10 minutes, threw my bag in the car, and drove away without looking back. I didn't feel safe staying another night. The worst part wasn't the panel being open. It was the fact that someone had probably been in that attic while I was sleeping. Maybe listening, maybe watching. There were no locks on the attic access, no cameras in the house, nothing stopping someone from climbing down in the middle of the night except my presence. And even that didn't feel like enough. I reported the incident to Airbnb support later that day, but I never heard anything about it again. I left a review, but I kept it vague, not wanting to start a back and forth with the host. The house looked safe from the outside, felt normal, up until it didn't. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I stay in unfamiliar places. Now I always check the ceilings. I check for attic panels, loose tiles, crawl spaces, anything that looks like it leads somewhere a person could hide. Because trust isn't enough. Not when someone else has the key. I booked a small Airbnb in a quiet neighborhood while I visited family for a few days. It was nothing fancy, just a simple, single-story place tucked between two other houses with well-kept lawns and the kind of trimmed hedges that made the whole area feel peaceful. The listing had decent reviews and the photos looked clean, so I didn't overthink it. I just needed somewhere private to sleep at night since I didn't want to bother my relatives too much with my late comings and goings. I checked in early in the afternoon. The sun was still high, casting sharp shadows along the sidewalk. The lockbox worked fine. I stepped in and did what I always do. Drop my bag by the couch, kick off my shoes, and slowly walk through the place to get a feel for it. The layout was pretty straightforward. Living room straight ahead, kitchen off to the left, and a narrow hallway leading down to the bathroom and bedroom. There was a linen closet in the hallway, a narrow door next to a framed print of a mountain lake. Everything seemed neat and tidy. The floors creaked a little when I walked, and the appliances looked like they were from the early 2000s, but nothing stood out as a problem. The couch smelled faintly like someone had cleaned it with a lemony spray. There was even a welcome note left on the table and a small bottle of water in the fridge, which I appreciated. I figured I'd gotten a good deal. It was only after an hour or two that I noticed a strange smell in the hallway. At first, I assumed it was just the way older homes sometimes smell, like dust mixed with wood or maybe a bit of mildew from the air conditioner. But this was different. It was sour, like old milk left in a hot car. Subtle, but unpleasant. I figured maybe the trash hadn't been taken out properly by the last guest, so I checked the bin under the sink. It was empty and lined with a fresh bag. Then I checked the bathroom. No sign of anything odd in there either. I opened all the windows I could. The front ones didn't open much, but I got a few cracked wide enough to let some fresh air in. I left the bedroom door open to let the air circulate and went about unpacking. Still, every time I passed the hallway, I caught that faint but sickly smell again. It didn't seem to be getting worse, but it wasn't going away either. I crouched near the floor to see if maybe something had leaked under the baseboards. Nothing visible. I even stuck my head into the linen closet, thinking maybe some damp towels had been left in there too long. But all I saw were neatly folded sheets, a couple of white bath towels, and a small box of tissues on the bottom shelf. I pulled a few things out, checked behind them, and didn't see anything unusual. It wasn't strong enough to justify calling the host yet, so I figured I'd deal with it in the morning if it was still lingering. That night, the smell got worse. It wasn't just noticeable anymore. It hit me every time I walked down the hall. I could feel it in my nose, like it clung to my nostrils. I lit a candle I had in my bag just to make it bearable. When I lay in bed trying to sleep, the smell seemed to creep under the door, as if it were slowly filling the house. I got up twice just to check if I'd missed something obvious. I ran the bathroom fan for a while. I even wiped down the shelves in the linen closet with a damp cloth. Still nothing helped. It started to bother me more than it probably should have. But something about it made my skin crawl. Not just the smell itself, but the fact that I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I ended up dozing off sometime around 3 in the morning, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking up every hour, eyes stinging, mouth dry, trying to ignore the headache that was forming from the smell. The next morning, as soon as I got out of bed, I decided I needed to find the source once and for all. I started with the linen closet again, pulling everything out this time. Every towel, every blanket, even the tissue box. When I removed the bottom shelf completely, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A vent cover low on the back wall, right near the floor. It was almost hidden behind the shelf frame. The metal slats looked dark, stained at the edges, and there was a faint crust around the screws like old moisture or rust. I leaned in closer. The sour smell hit me like a slap. It was definitely coming from there, I didn't have any tools, but I went to the kitchen and found a butter knife. It barely fit into the screw heads, but after a few minutes of slow, careful work, I managed to loosen them. The vent cover creaked as I pulled it off. I held it in one hand and turned on the flashlight on my phone. Then I crouched and aimed the light into the dark space behind the wall. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Lying just inside, curled up and wedged awkwardly behind the drywall and ductwork, was a dead opossum. Not small, fully grown. Its fur was matted and dirty. Its limbs twisted like it had gotten stuck while trying to escape. The skin had pulled tight around its face, and I could see the teeth. It was bloated in places and sunken in others, and the smell was overwhelming now that the vent was open. My stomach turned, and I barely kept myself from vomiting right there. I dropped the vent cover and slammed the closet door shut like that would make a difference. I ran to the bathroom, washed my hands, splashed water on my face, and just stood there breathing through my mouth. My eyes watered. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't believe how close that thing had been all night, slowly rotting just a few feet from where I was sleeping. I messaged the host. I didn't want to touch it again or even go near that hallway. I wrote that there was a dead animal behind the wall and that the smell was unbearable. I didn't even wait for a full response before I started packing my things. I couldn't stay there another night. I took one last look to make sure I hadn't left anything, grabbed my bag, and walked out. I sat in my car with the windows down for a long while before I could even start driving. I felt like the smell had clung to my clothes, to my skin. Eventually, the host replied, apologizing. She said something along the lines of, "That happens sometimes." I thought we sealed that part off. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I sent a refund request through Airbnb, attached the photos I'd taken of the vent and the dead opossum. Within a few hours, they approved it. I ended up staying with my cousin for the rest of the trip, slept on his couch and dealt with the mild awkwardness of being a last-minute guest. But I didn't care. At least his place didn't smell like death. I couldn't get that image out of my head for days. The way the animal looked twisted and forgotten. The way the sour stench had slowly built up, unnoticed. Since then, every time I check into a new place, Airbnb, hotel, guest room, I do the same thing. I walk through the rooms slowly, I open the closets, and most of all, I sniff the air. It sounds strange, maybe obsessive, but I can't help it. There's something about a smell like that. Once you've smelled it, once you've lived near it for even one night, it never leaves you. It's like a warning your body remembers. And I'll never ignore that warning again. I rented a 2-bedroom Airbnb for a weekend trip with my sister. She couldn't get the Friday off work, so I got there a day earlier. It was in a quiet neighborhood just outside a small town. Nothing remote, but far enough from the city to feel like a break. The unit was part of a duplex, single-story, with a driveway and a little patch of lawn. It looked normal, maybe a little older than the pictures, but clean. The host had left the key in a lockbox by the front door and messaged me the code earlier in the day. When I walked in, it smelled like lemon cleaner. The lights were all off except for one in the kitchen. The place had a worn-in feel. Beige carpet, a slightly lumpy couch, a flat-screen TV mounted too high on the wall, a couple framed photos of what looked like random countryside scenes. Nothing fancy, but nothing sketchy either. I dropped my bag in the larger of the 2 bedrooms and took a quick walk around. The second bedroom had twin beds and a little desk. There was one bathroom, stocked with basic toiletries. Everything seemed fine. I made myself some tea, watched a little YouTube on my phone, then locked up and went to bed around 10:30. I kept the bedroom door open. I don't know why. Maybe because I was alone and wanted to hear if anything was going on in the rest of the house. I set my phone to do not disturb but kept it face up on the nightstand. The hallway light spilled into the room from under the doorframe. I was just starting to fall asleep when I heard it. A knock at the front door. Not a hard knock, just 3 slow, spaced-out taps. I froze. For a second, I thought I imagined it. I sat up and waited. 10 seconds later, 3 more knocks. Same rhythm. I got up quietly and moved toward the front of the house. The knocks didn't come again, but I kept hearing a faint shuffling noise. I looked through the peephole. A man was standing there, late 30s maybe. He had a suitcase in one hand and a phone in the other. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there, glancing down at his phone, then back up at the door. I didn't open it. My heart was racing. I backed away from the door and crouched behind the wall so he couldn't see any movement through the windows. Then I heard his voice. "Hey," he said, loud enough to carry through the door. "I'm the other guest. The host double booked. Can I come in?" No way. I wasn't even going to respond. I unlocked my phone and went straight to the Airbnb app, opened the message thread with the host, and typed, "Asterisk, someone's at the door. Says he's the other guest. Claims you double booked. Asterisk." She replied within 30 seconds. Asterisk, no one else is supposed to be there. Don't open the door. Asterisk. I felt my stomach drop. The man was still outside. I didn't know if he could see movement through the peephole from his side, so I stayed low. After a minute or so of silence, he knocked again. Then again. Still 3 knocks each time. Not angry, just steady. I watched the shadows under the door. He wasn't pacing or walking around. He was just standing there. It was like he expected me to eventually cave in and open up. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 11. He stood there for almost 20 minutes. Every now and then I'd hear him shift or clear his throat, but he didn't knock again. At one point he walked a little off to the side. I saw his silhouette cross in front of the window, but he came right back to the door. Then, just like that, he left. I peeked through the peephole again and he was gone. I waited a few more minutes before creeping to the front window and pulling the curtain back an inch. He was walking down the street with his suitcase rolling behind him. Not running, not looking back, just casually strolling away, like he was heading home from the grocery store. I locked everything again, even though I already had. I pushed the heavy armchair in front of the front door, then grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find and brought it with me to the bedroom. Couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that he had circled around and was hiding in the backyard, or that he'd figured out how to open one of the windows. Every small sound made me jump. The fridge kicked on at one point and I thought someone was moving in the hallway. My heart was in my throat for half the night. Around 3 a.m., I started to feel a little stupid for being so scared, but I stayed up anyway. By morning, I hadn't slept more than maybe 40 minutes in total. When the sun came up, I messaged the host again and told her he was gone, but I wanted to know what the hell had happened. She apologized again and sent me a screenshot of a message she'd received late the previous night. It was from a brand new Airbnb account. No reviews, no name, just a username like guest194837. The message said, asterisk, "Hey, I forgot the exact address of the Airbnb. Can you send it again?" Asterisk. She hadn't replied. She told me she always refuses to give out the address directly to anyone unless they're booked through the app. She checked her settings and confirmed that no one else had access to the place. No double booking, no mix-up. Just someone who had somehow found the listing, maybe grabbed screenshots when it was still public, and tried to show up pretending to be a guest. Airbnb customer support got involved. I had to write a detailed report. The host told them everything too. By that afternoon, the listing had been switched to private. She said she was going to install a security camera and change the locks just in case. When my sister arrived later that day, I didn't tell her the full story until we were driving back home 2 days later. I didn't want to freak her out while we were still staying there. We didn't have any more issues the rest of the weekend, but I couldn't fully relax. I kept checking the peephole every couple hours and slept with that same knife next to the bed. I don't know how he got the address. Maybe he recognized something in the photos, like a street sign, a business in the background, something small I didn't notice. Maybe he'd stayed in the same area before and guessed. Maybe he had a more sophisticated way of finding it. I'll never know. What still gets to me is how calm he was. No shouting, no banging, no trying to break in. He looked like a real guest, acted like one, like he really thought he could talk his way in, like maybe it had worked before. I still use Airbnb, but now I only rent places with doorbell cameras and multiple verified reviews. I also make sure never to arrive alone if I can help it. That night made it clear, sometimes it's not the place that's dangerous. It's the people who try to get in.